Welcome to Museum Mondays with High Caliber History and Gun Websites. We are two friends who enjoy going to gun museums in different parts of the United States, and we are getting together to chat about gun museums. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Does it get any better, guns in museums? I don't think so.
Not really. It's history. It's exploring new things. It's learning, and that can be fun, especially in the information age, right, where it seems like everything's at our fingertips.
Definitely, yeah, and that's the thing, is that with Google Street View and all sorts of stuff, you can get into some museums and see stuff, but not everything. There have been some places where it's all digitized and you can take a virtual tour, but that's not always the case. And so I think that's kind of what you and I are hoping to do, is kind of take people through on our own and talk about museums that we've both been to and museums that the other person hasn't been to, and it's on the list, and hope to spark that level of learning with other people to get them to want to go visit these places as well.
You bet. And we're kind of cutting new ground here, so we're going to do shows each week, and then once a month we're going to go live where we can chat with an audience and kind of wrap up and talk about some of the stuff that we record here. And like you mentioned, we're going to talk about museums that we've been to but the other hasn't, some that we've both been to, and then some other things as well, just some general topics we'll mix in there.
Yep, absolutely.
So this is, I guess, our first episode like this. We've had a couple of fits and starts with this project, but this will be our first, I guess, official review of museums. And what museums are going to be taking a look at today?
For me, we're going to look at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. And what museum are you going to look at?
I'm going to take a look at the 45th Infantry Division Museum in Oklahoma City. And these are
awesome.
We wanted to pick museums we hadn't been to that we both want to go to. So I just haven't been that far east, at least since I was a little kid, and I had no say, and I didn't know to go there, and if I knew about it. And you just hadn't been to Oklahoma City yet to see this one.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've been out that way, but I've always been on. I've had different things going on and haven't had a chance to make it, so it's definitely on the list.
All right, so I don't know which one to do first. Why don't we go with the one in the east? I've got the map brought up here from Oklahoma City, but unless you've got one, we can scroll over here. It's in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I've got, let me do a screen share here, and I'll bring up the map. I've got, is that show up?
Yep.
Good deal, yeah. So Springfield Armory National Historic Site. It's in Springfield, Massachusetts. So we zoom out here and zoom way out. You can see where it's at, Hartford and Providence, Rhode Island, and get a feel for where it's at. Boston's way over here.
Oh, it's not keeping up with that scroll, so we're still seeing the building kind of zoomed in where it's the green part that's taking up most of the screen.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so I guess it's got a little bit of a lag going on. But so I guess I can talk while I'm hoping for it to catch up, but the easiest way to explain it is that it's due north of Hartford, Connecticut.
There we go.
And
okay.
It is it's to the west of Boston, and it's west of Worcester, Mass. as well. And it's definitely due south of Keene, New Hampshire. So it is right in the breadbasket of arms making, if you will. And so
the map,
there's a lot going on there.
It's showing us now basically the whole state of Massachusetts, and it's kind of dead center east and west, I guess, maybe a little bit left.
A little more west, but
then is it all the way to the south? It's hard to see the state line.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the south. It doesn't take too long to get there, rolling up from like Hartford, Connecticut. It'll take you about an hour or so.
Okay.
to go between those two.
And as you zoom in, you can see that river. So that's what the power is. That why they accumulated there? The power was the river, the water power.
Yeah, so this site was actually selected by George Washington. It was laid out in the 1790s, and Springfield was it was the hotbed of gun manufacturing for so many companies up in that area, in Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York and all sorts of places. So it really made sense to put an armory up there, close to Boston. And it thrived there for years and years, centuries. They don't close this place down until I think the word finally comes in 1964 that it's going to shut down, which is more than 100 years after the other federal arsenal, which was at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, wasn't West Virginia yet, is out of commission by 1861. So the Springfield Armory has more than 100 years more history to delve into and talk about, and the buildings survive. That's the other big difference with this facility than what we've got at Harper's Ferry. A lot of it was burned during the war. Some stuff was rebuilt. When I say the war, I mean the Civil War. And it just never recovered. I mean, Harper's Ferry is still just a little town there. But Springfield is obviously a very different ball game. It's a huge community that has grown up around it. As you can see, I think I've got it on the satellite view, and you can see everything that is built up around the arsenal there. And it's a very active campus with all sorts of different things going on, higher education and learning right in the Armory complex. But they've had a museum for more than 100 years in one form or another. It started in the early 1900s, and then it got a boost in the 1930s, and then of course when the Park Service takes it over, I mean that's their bailiwick. They are in the museum business, and so it has really boomed as a historic site once the Park Service got a hold of it, and they have a phenomenal firearms collection, from the very earliest of stuff, the model 1795 muskets that they were making, all the way up through, the Garands and the M14s and M16s as well, and I'll show some photos of those. So it really covers the whole gamut. You get the vast majority of American military small arms technology is all encompassed right here in this one museum. You can see a little bit of everything in there. So I'm gonna.
Now, when you say the Park Service took it over, was that like they were handed it, or did they eagerly petition to take it, or was it? Did you know about the transition?
Well, when it closed as the when it closed from being the arsenal, they needed something to do with all the buildings, and so the Park Service often steps in cases like this when historic sites or government entities are closing down. They recognize the historic value. But so, as I mentioned, they make the decision to close it down in '64, but it's not until the mid to late '70s that the Park Service takes over and creates, the full-blown tourist attraction, if you will, that we know it to be today. So, because of the way my screen share thing works, are you guys seeing a photo of the Park Service sign yet?
Yep, I mentioned that's the main entrance.
Yeah, yep. So it can be a confusing complex to get into because, as you saw from the map, there's a lot going on. There's a lot built up there. But it is, the Armory buildings still stand, and so you go in the entrance. If I'm moving my mouse over here, you'll see that there's this little entrance that when I was there, it was a little bit under construction, but so you go into the Armory building there, and then it ends up opening up into this awesome museum. And let me.
If you know, when you're on a photo like this, if you hold down the control key on your keyboard and use the wheel on your mouse, it'll zoom in and zoom out.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So here's one of the things that is has been widely lauded by museum folks and visitors at the arsenal. It's their organ of muskets, and these are all percussion muskets. There's a couple flintlocks thrown in there, but there are hundreds and hundreds of Springfield Model 1861s, mostly Springfield muskets, stuff that was used during the Civil War, all making up this gigantic display that is front and center in the Arsenal's museum. It's long been one of their mainstays and is definitely one of the most visually striking things that they have on display there. That's kind of the must see, and it's hard not to see it because it is such a large and impressive piece.
Are they around the perimeter there, or is that solid in the middle too?
That's I'm trying to remember if it's solid in the middle or
because it almost looks like, if looking at that top, you can almost see barrels, like if it's just rows and rows and rows, like that's just a grid work of them.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's what it is. It's just rows on rows on rows. And part of this stemmed out of visual storage and just needing places to house all of these guns, and you kind of start to realize that the way they're storing stuff on the arsenal racks actually looks pretty cool when you put it into a museum setting. So that's kind of a bit of a mirror with what you get here. Not exactly, but a little bit. And another one of the really impressive pieces you get here, this is called the Blanchard lathe. Very antique looking machine here. And it dates to the late 1700s, and it is a stock duplicating machine. And that is how we end up getting uniform stocks made for the rifles, is with this machine. And so, see if I can get it to zoom in a little bit better there. Yeah, I'll put my cursor on the stock here on this, and you can see the cursor on the brown stock up top is the one that's being made by the lathe. It goes all the way through here, and the cutting wheels are making this stock here, and it's making it, and I'll move my mouse down and you'll see it when the lag picks up, on this metal master stock down here. And so as it's turning, it's making the brown stock up top, and that's a big deal to get some mechanical work that is making stocks of a fairly uniform design very early on. We're talking pre-1800. Of course, we don't get interchangeable parts in a real feasible way for another 50 or so years, but they at least had found a way to make fairly similar stocks on this duplicating machine, which is really going to be beneficial moving forward. Even to today, you see stuff with CAD machines and designs and custom stock makers still using duplicating tools very similar to this Blanchard lathe from the late 1700s. So, and this is the original one that's been at the arsenal since the 1700s. So it's an incredibly historic piece in its own right.
One of the neatest things about firearms history is the how interweaved it is with society and with culture and with industry, and this is mass production, which was necessary for interchangeable parts, which was necessary for industrialization and that whole wave. So, and then the neatest part is when you see some of the innovations in firearms, the people that created the machines to make the guns, and they can be just as clever But what you're saying is that this is the machine. So again, made with uh, uh, such quality and strength that it not only made, well, is there a way to even understand how many gun stocks this is made? But it's still holding up, and all the parts that were sacrificial or designed, it was all designed to last forever. So just the amount of engineering here, it's neat. And again, you can see this in a picture, but to walk around a corner and then to experience this in real life, that's amazing. And to know that the country values it enough to have it here and to put all the resources to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard to tell from looking at it in a photo. I mean, but this thing is massive. I mean, it is a gargantuan, incredibly heavy machine. I mean, you look at the size of some of the gears on there, and the size of some of the timbers. I mean, you figure, you can kind of picture in your mind's eye, the size that gun stock is in real life, and then you can extrapolate out from there just how massive this machine has to be in order to accomplish that. And to make that stock look so small on there, and you can see the little lines and striations on the stock that are not finely cut. This is it's a duplicating machine, but it's not a precision machine. So this is going to take your blank and give you the rough form, and of course it still has to be filed and fit by hand to get it to where it needs to be for production. But it's still, that's going a long way to help out with what's going on and to make things more uniform as opposed to guys having to sit there with draw files and cutting these down one by one and hoping that they're somewhat similar.
And that means each one of them has to have a prototype to build to, so those are going to fluctuate, and then each of their individual pieces fluctuate, and yeah, you're left with...
Right, it's like when you play a game of telephone, and eventually the whole story changes as it goes on, and it's kind of the same way with the stocks. So moving forward, we'll go through a progression of some of the other stuff. Are you guys seeing a serial number 1 on the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so this is one of the guns that's in the museum. This is a model 1917 Enfield rifle. This one was made by Winchester, so of course that's what you've got the W for. And this one is serial number 1, as you can see. And this gun was actually presented to President Woodrow Wilson. Of course, Wilson is the one that we went into World War I under his guise. He was president. Oh, sorry, girl. He was president at the time, and of course he got into office, and Wilson kept us out of war for a second term, but that's irrelevant. So this is kind of a cool piece on a number of levels. You've got this model 1917 bolt-action Enfield rifle that is arguably a better gun than the 1903, and this particular piece, serial number 1, and it's a presidential presentation gun, which is really, really cool. To be able to tie that history together, and as I go through and show you a few more here, we'll see the presentation connections that get made in a lot of these guns, as well as the very low serial number connections that we make. So moving on to another photo, you can either see or you will see shortly.
Yep.
Of course, the model 1903 that we were just talking about, made it at a number of different places, also at the Rock Island Arsenal and stuff. But this is the model 1903 Springfield Armory serial number 1, and that's an incredibly historic piece that actually at one point ended up out of the museum collection during the war. They had to do some jiggering to get it back, but they managed to get a hold of the gun, pull it out of service, and bring it back and put it on display because they recognized how incredibly historic this gun was. Yes, it is a weapon of war, and it was doing its duty in a soldier's hands overseas. But it's also an important part of our history to be able to see where it all began with this serial number 1.
Now it looks all kind of beat up. Is that because it was in service? It was actually used, and then they found it and brought it back?
Yeah, yeah, this gun actually was used. It did see service in the hands of the United States Army soldiers. So it is a tried and true battle worn veteran there. You can only imagine what the soldier who had it must have thought. You know, having serial number 1 in his hands is pretty darn cool.
Seriously, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. So the next thing we're going to switch over to, I had mentioned that they've got some prototypes and some one-offs and experimentation, because that's all being done here at the Armory. That's where all of your new ideas are coming from. You know, John Garand, when he's coming up with his rifle, he'd already spent a decade or two working at Springfield coming up with the designs, and so there's a long history of inventors and gun designers, you know, trying to build a better mousetrap. And so one of the things that we see here, now you've got a revolver up on your screen. That's a Smith & Wesson Model 3. But if you look at it, it definitely looks different. There is a bulge on the frame in front of the cylinder. And that's because this gun is, by design, initially, it's a top break revolver. Which was certainly easier to load and unload the cartridges than it was on the Colt single action Army, which was one at a time with an ejector rod. This has a ratchet that when you break the gun open, it automatically ejects. Well, we're always looking to improve on stuff, and so I'll switch over to another image there, and that bulge on the frame gives way to show that this one doesn't break open. It swings open, and the design pivots over. Everything pivots over to the right, and then the hand still ejects all of the spent cartridges there. Why they thought they needed to do that kind of an improvement is unknown. I don't have the answer to that. I'm not sure anyone really has the answer to that, other than some enterprising individual was hoping to, you know, make the next big thing and get in on a lucrative government contract.
Well, I think instead of having to rely on the spring and the tension of the spring to hold the top strap, like this way you could have a solid top strap and it would kind of like interlock with near the hammer, perhaps.
Oh, yeah.
You know, be a stronger, I guess, option to be able to pivot like that. Now, it's still, like you say, it's still ejected all 6 at once, like the top eject.
Right. Yeah. So no, but you're right. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective.
But that seems fragile.
A strength benefit there.
Strength for shooting, but then it seems like it would get fragile. Obviously, it didn't work, so it didn't follow through with it. But I bet you it's because the strength to make that spring pop out would be tough to accomplish without the top brake.
Yeah. Yeah, that could very well be.
But that's neat. I've never seen that. I mean, I've seen some Derringers and stuff with swing side barrels, but that's a neat. And that's the kind of stuff.
To see something that large on that scale with the side swing out is really unusual. And then especially, you know, with the beauty of hindsight, we look at, you know, we've got swing out cylinders on revolvers now, and of course that's commonplace, but that wasn't the case when these guns were being developed in the 1870s. That was not something that had entered anyone's mind. So next up, we've got here, and by the way, the gentleman holding all of these guns, you can see part of his beard in there. This is Alex McKenzie. He's the curator at the Arsenal there. Very nice guy. But he's holding a beautiful presentation M1903 bolt action rifle, beautiful fiddleback wood there, and you can just sort of see over here in the stock that there is a plaque built into the butt there that gives way to the fact that this is a presentation gun, and so it is. Where's the patent photo? Oh, here we are. So this is an 03A3 and serial number 4 million with an X prefix in front of it, denoting that it ends up going to be a presentation piece. And this gun they end up giving it's the 1 millionth 1903 A3, presented on 4 January 1944 to Colonel Frank J. Atwood, District Chief, Rochester Ordnance District, made by the Remington Arms Company, Inc., Ilion Works, New York. And of course, Colonel Atwood, if you've collected or even just seen at all any of the World War II milsurp stuff, you will see his initials, FJA, in the inspector cartouches on a lot of the stocks of the military guns at that time. So the fact that they presented the 1 millionth 03A3 to him coming out of the Remington factory is pretty cool. And even cooler that it's at the museum for folks to see. All right, let's see. Yeah. So, and now we've got an M1 carbine that'll be popping up on your screen, and this is another one of those low serial number, really cool deals going on with this gun. This is an inland M1 carbine. Of course, the M1 carbines were made by a ton of different companies, but as you can see on this one, and they've filled it in with a little bit of white paint on there, but it's inland serial number 1. Again, dealing with the incredibly historic stuff that you expect to see in a museum, right? And that's exactly what we've got here is inland serial number 1, which is pretty darn cool. And then we start to get into some even more modern stuff than that. This is the gun that's popping up now is an Armalite rifle, and this one, as you can see, is serial number 6. And I think they also have like serial number 8 there in the museum as well. Serial number 1's down in Florida in Reed Knight's collection, but serial number 6, you know, it doesn't get a whole lot earlier than that in terms of the designs. And of course, you know, these guns all came through Springfield for testing. And so I think it's only fitting that one of these guns ends up making its way back to the arsenal, because if it weren't for all of the testing that goes on and all of the military brass signing off on designs, and you know, we wouldn't end up having them in the military hands unless they'd all gone through Springfield first. Another one that we'll look at here is visually very a cool looking gun, in addition to the fact that we've got really neat waffle mag in there, which are rare in their own right, but that gold finish with the black furniture makes for a very visually striking gun. And this is XM16E1, serial number 050000, so serial number 50,000. But it's believed that the reason this gun is made up in this color configuration is because it was slated for presentation to President John F. Kennedy. Of course, there is a historic photo of Kennedy holding an AR pattern rifle in the Oval Office, while another gentleman is standing there holding a crossbow, which is kind of the neat juxtaposition of the technologies. But so they were planning on presenting this gun to President Kennedy, but of course things go way south for him in Dallas before he can receive the gun, and so it ends up staying at Springfield Armory and is part of their museum collection. Of course, I'm sure that, you know, had it been given to the president anyway, it would have ended up on display to the public in his presidential library, but it's not the case. So now you can go up to Springfield Armory and check that one out. And then we'll go a little bit out of order, just because I labeled my photos wrong. But we'd be remiss to really not spend some time and talk about John Garand here and his developments that he put together. And so the device that we're seeing up on the screen now, or that you'll see here in just a second, is a really, really cool M1 receiver. Well, what becomes an M1. This is T3E1, and this is in .276 caliber, and it's dated on the side October of 1929. It's noted that it's number 1. So again, cool stuff going on with the serial numbers. But this was one of Aaron's test pieces that he was working on when he was developing the M1. And my favorite part about this is I'll scroll over to the front of the receiver here, and on the side, you can see that it's actually got a wheel, or it would have a wheel. It's got a spot for a wheel that would actually tell you how many rounds were left in the magazine. As you fired each one, it would tick down and give you an idea of how many were there, which I think is pretty cool. Of course, that doesn't end up becoming part of the gun once they make it to production, really, because I don't think guys in the field are going to spend the time to look at the side of their gun to see how many rounds are left in the mag. But I thought it was a really neat idea, nonetheless.
But it shows again the development, evolution, right? Like that's extra parts and extra time to machine, and if it's not necessary, it doesn't make the cut for the more like streamlined production model. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like you said. It's going to take more time to machine the parts, and then it's one more thing that could break or whatever. It ends up being deemed not necessary in order to get the guns in the production line. But it is a very cool piece of M1 rifle development, and gives you a little bit of insight into what was going on in John Guerin's head when he was coming up with this design. So it's still a really cool piece.
And he developed that there, right? Like you said, he was a Canadian. Yes. He was a gunsmith. He came to the United States. I think he was in the service, and then he went into Springfield as a builder.
Yeah, he came into the arsenal, or into the armory, I think around 1920 or so. He ended up becoming a naturalized citizen around that same time. And yeah, he had worked on earlier bolt action designs, but it was around 1920, 1922. He says he starts getting interested in creating these semi-automatic and automatic designs. Of course, as you can see, by October of 29, he's got the patent model, the working patent model for the T3E1.
But aside from like his bedroom ponderings or whatever, like all that's being done on paper in the buildings there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just, hey, here's all of the stuff that he was working on, and we're going to throw it in here. It's
this got moved down from his office to the museum, just down the hall, as opposed to from some other location.
Right, exactly. He lived in Springfield, Massachusetts until he died. And so you can, you walk the grounds at Springfield, and you're walking grounds that John Guerin walked on. And it's not too hard with a little stretch of your imagination to see what it was like and imagine what things were like for him in the pre-war and wartime period when he was designing these guns. And it's really cool that all of that is preserved for the American public, and that you can go there and look at all of his stuff. And it's hands-on history. You can go look at all of his developmental pieces, and then go to a local gun show and check out an actual Guerin rifle, and see what he was able to put into production. And it's very, very cool to put those two things together.
And when all is said and done, he gave the patent to the United States. Just gave it to us, right?
Yep. So yeah, with that, I think I've kind of covered pretty much everything on the armory side of things. It's a very cool museum. It's free to go into. This is your museum. It's the National Park Service. We own that land as a people. And we own all of that history and that heritage, and it's there for us to explore at our leisure.
Now, when you saw most of those guns in the pictures, it looked like they were on a table or something. Are those on display, or did you have access or something to see some of those?
Yeah, well, they switch stuff out periodically, and so the M1903 and the M1917 serial number 1 guns were on display. the serial number 1 Inland Carbine, and the millionth A3, and the AR number 6, and the one that was made for JFK. Those at that time were not on display. I had made arrangements with the curator there to gain access for some behind the scenes stuff. But they do switch out the exhibits, and so this was a couple years ago that I was there, so some of that stuff might have been switched out and incorporated. But the important thing to remember again is that this is your collection. It's my collection. It's our collection. And so if you've got a legitimate research inquiry and desire with these guns, you can get a hold of the staff there, and you can work something out with them, make arrangements to see certain pieces if they're not on display. Because again, they belong to you and I. And the staff there is great. They're wonderful guys. Alex, the curator, is just a really wonderful guy. He's a consummate professional and a gun guy to boot. And so I feel delighted that he's the one acting as the curator and the custodian of these guns for us. He's doing a great job.
Right on, and I'm glad you brought that up because I've experienced it a few times myself, not with me, but with being at museums with others, and the curators were able to bring stuff out that, like you say, was not on display, but there. And they don't expect it, but it's often worth exploring.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always worth asking, because the worst they could do is say no, right?
Mm-hmm. And they might say, come back tomorrow, or maybe come back in 2 months, and that is planning on being displayed, or you might influence their decision on what comes up next.
Exactly. It's like, you ask about X, Y, and Z, and they're like, you're the 10th person to ask about that. Maybe we should get that on display, So it's just like you and I had talked last time about comment cards. Make sure to fill out comment cards, because that's going to have an impact on what goes on display. So yeah, if you don't see it on display at any museum, Springfield or otherwise, ask about it, because that does help influence what they put up in the long run. So.
All right, so I'll dig into the 45th Infantry Division Museum. I think I'm screen sharing, so we're playing with some tech here, and honestly, I'm not digging this. I figured out I can't mute this way also, but we're testing some technical ways of doing the show. So I'm screen sharing now, and this is a map of Oklahoma. You can't see it real good on the Google map. That's a little easier maybe. And Oklahoma City's right dead center in Oklahoma. And as I scroll in, the 45th Infantry Division Museum is pretty centered in town, I think. I'm not familiar with Oklahoma City that much, but I usually drive either east and west on 40 or coming up from Texas on one of these roads, and it's never difficult to find this museum. As you can see, it's right off whatever this road is, 35, which I believe is the route up to Tulsa, so it's not too far. It's on the side of town if you're coming from Tulsa. So as I scroll in, there's some kind of a golf course or something, like a big park that you'll pass. And then before you know it, it just turns from park into the museum here, and I'm going to flip this out of the way, and I'll flip to satellite, and the outside of this museum is just as impressive and interesting as the inside. So you can't hang out there when it's closed, but certainly leave yourself time to both experience the museum and the outside static displays. I think they're showing up on the screen here to give you some scale. This is a big building.
Oh, cool.
Big building, but lots of displays. There's everything from tanks and vehicles to planes, helicopters. It's a little bit of everything. It's really neat. It's not just it might be all Army, but it's a big range of stuff. So you come in, you park. It's free. It's like a lot of museums. There's a jar that you can leave some funds in. Whenever it's open, you'll know the gates are open. I think it's a virtual tour here, maybe. Maybe not. So this gives you an idea. It's the old Armory building, from what I understand, and then the grounds, and the Thunderbird is one of their insignias. It's kind of weird. The 45th Infantry Division's other insignia is the swastika, so unless you understand it, it's kind of interesting to so I chose the Thunderbird when I post images of the museum, but I guess when you fought them, you have a whole different point of view on that thing. So let's jump into some pictures, and I'm going to do something similar to what Logan did there, and just kind of scroll through a photo album here and get rid of that, and again, that's one of their logos. They got a couple of patches. I'm not I'm familiar with military stuff, but I am no military history buff or insignia or uniform aficionado or nothing, so I apologize if I'm blowing over something that should have more significance. I'm not sure when I visited why the flags are at half staff. I'd have to think for a bit on that. But this is the building, really nice looking building, and it gives you an idea of the scale. From what I understand, this was a private collection. This was majority of the guns we're going to see in the museum are from one person's collection, and they donated it to the 45th Infantry Division, and then they created this awesome presentation. So imagine probably about a 4x8 piece of display with about 4 foot deep, another 4 something feet tall, plenty of room, nice dioramas, probably light on the labeling and the descriptions, but the lighting is great, and the what would you say, like the amount of stuff is you're going to need some time to experience it. The glass is pretty decent. You can see there's some glare, but I was able to get some pretty decent pictures. So if there's something specific you're interested in, I didn't include them in this recap, but I took pictures of like a lot of these close-ups. And from my experience with museums, I really appreciate it when they have the label right next to the item like that, because if you wanted to show maybe this gun to a friend of yours who's trying to buy a replica, by able to take the picture with the description, it's just real handy, right? Real easy to get that information around.
Yep.
Most of their displays, though, these are all about from your knees to a little bit above your head, so real easy to experience. Even if you're in a wheelchair, there's a couple of you have to use stairs to get in. You can come in by the gift shop, and there's a ramp. There's a couple of stairs, but I imagine there's enough volunteers there to help somebody get up into this one portion with the stairs, if there might have been a ramp that I'm not aware of. But most of this area is plenty wide and nice and flat for anybody, any accessibility. There's some places you can sit down, so if you're with somebody that's older or just somebody who wants to sit down with a kid or something, there are a couple of benches. So it's a well thought out museum as well, and it's square footage wise, it's not real big. You could, if you just wanted to see it, you could easily see it in an hour, but if you wanted to just immerse yourself, spend 3 easily. And again, I'm kind of showing you they're by campaigns, so for the most part they have each little segment is a campaign that we've gone through, but again, like Civil War, World War II, they get a little bit bigger. The Civil War is actually a really big portion, about 25% easy of the museum.
Oh wow.
Again, I'm a museum person, so these things interest me, and some of these things I know specifics about, but in general I just try to take pictures to give people an overall idea, and then hopefully encourage you to go experience it yourself. So I might be missing like a type here or something, and help me if I'm overlooking something that's truly unique, but this again, I took pictures. These pictures probably include about 60% of the whole museum, and don't include a whole portion that I kind of alluded to that's up on, you kind of go up some stairs towards the back. And while the museum is predominantly displaying this collection of firearms, small arms, it also has a portion of the museum which is like dedicated to each of, I don't know what you call them, they're not, what do you call like the signal corps and the medics and the different parts of the army. So there's like this segment in back where they just have sort of a collection of neat stuff, probably stuff that's like been donated to the museum and it's sort of like accumulated. It doesn't seem to be like a specific collection that was complete. It just seems to be like a growing collection of interesting stuff. So I don't really have too many pictures of that because I was kind of focusing on the guns. There's also a neat portion that gets into some dedications, some memorials, some stuff for the 45th Infantry Division specifically, which is neat and worth taking some time to appreciate. When a unit, these pieces have a lot of history, so this is kind of a memorial to those guys. And then here's some of the static stuff outside.
Now, you had mentioned that a lot of this stuff was one guy's collection. Was it just the stuff inside that was mostly his, or was he a big-time collector with like the tanks and the planes too?
That's a great question. Now, I didn't take any time to talk to anybody at the museum. I just basically read a plaque, and that's where it described that it came from majority one guy's collection. But I do not know about the static stuff. That would be interesting, because there are definitely people that have that kind of collection, and I mean,
Yeah.
Dragon Man's collection dwarfs this one. So, so there's definitely private collections, and that I'm not sure. You know, that's a good question. And there were plaques out there, but again, I'm not aviation or tank or vehicle buff, so I just kind of walked around and experienced them. It's been a while since I've been able to be at such a neat park with so many static displays, and so I didn't read all the plaques, but they might. I'm sure some of them had dedications to where they came from. Usually they do. So yeah, lots of neat stuff. In Oklahoma City has the Cowboy Museum just down the street. Well, there's of course the Oklahoma City Memorial, but then there's a couple of really neat gun shops in Oklahoma City. And then just down the street in Tulsa, about an hour or something away, you've got the J.M. Davis Museum and the Colt collection there that I can never remember the name of. It's pretty impressive. So Oklahoma is a great place to visit.
What was like the coolest piece in this? Because your pictures were great, and I love that there's a really nice cross section of all different time periods in here. But was there some stuff that really stuck out to you of like, oh wow, that's really cool to see that in a museum, because you don't see it elsewhere, you know, or you see them on TV, but you don't get to see them in real life.
The Gatling gun was neat because, as you can see, as long as you're not a little tiny kid, you can touch it. You're not supposed to touch stuff, but it's right there. And even if you don't touch it, just knowing that you could is pretty impressive. You guys at the NRA Museum, there's am I correct that the Gatling gun at the NRA Museum traces its roots back to literally the Gatling gun that he didn't bring with him to
San Juan Hill?
Right.
Yep.
So I don't know if this one has that kind of provenance, but I mean, there wasn't that many Gatling guns, so it's probably got some provenance. But the Gatling gun is neat. I mean, but I've seen Gatling guns at other museums. But really, this one to me, I think, not a specific gun. My tastes are more towards just dumb guns, military guns. I value and everything, but since I don't even think about collecting them or anything like that, nothing is like. Stands out as far as a specific gun. But my favorite thing about this museum is that, number one, it's free, but the way that they group it. So I think for taking someone like a kid or just someone who's getting into guns to a museum, unlike so many of the other museums I've ever experienced, this one you can walk in, you can understand what the guns of this era are, the guns of this era, because they're, you know, you can understand the evolution of them. So I think the museum as a whole is a unique experience. I can't put my finger on any particular one, but it's definitely in my top 5 for sure. It might even, depending on if it gave me a bit of a, you know, if it was a military museum, top 2 or 3 easily, but maybe top 5 of all firearms museums, just because of the concept that if you just wanted to go in and experience them all, like so often you have to discover, like at J.M. Davis, you have to go all over the place to find the cowboy guns. They're just all over the place, or the guns of World War II could be everywhere. So for that, this is a neat one, and it's complete. I'm not again I don't know if it's missing something here, but there's very few cases where there's only a one example. So the person's collection was amazing.
Very cool. Now, here's one thing we didn't touch on with Springfield, but seeing your pictures here, it made me think of it. Did they have like a bookstore or a gift shop, you know, where you could buy different things related to the 45th Infantry and stuff like that there?
That's a great, yeah, they definitely, I mentioned that, like, you can, if you're going to come in with a wheelchair or you just don't want to hit steps, the front door has steps. So you can come in the side door, which is closer to the entrance of the parking lot, closer to the main entrance of the place, on the east end of the building. And yeah, you'll walk past the bathrooms and then the gift shop, which isn't necessarily a gift shop as much as like a big coat room, right? It's kind of a wart off of the hallway. You know, it's just the hallway gets wider and they filled it in with the gift shop. So yeah, that's where I found the first time I ever found the Firearms Inventors coloring book. Have you seen that coloring book? And it's neat. It's got like Kalashnikov and Browning, of course, and a bunch of other Gatling and stuff. And it's a coloring book for kids, not one of these adult ones. So it's neat. That's done by the people who do Shotgun, Small Arms Review out of Nevada, I think. So I'd never even seen that, and I saw that on the shelves there. They had little toy tanks and stuff that were just a notch better than what you get at like the drugstore or something, for like a cheap thing of Army men. You get like a little bit nicer Army men here, but nothing fancy, too fancy. So there's like gifts for a kid, especially if they get all juiced up about seeing those static displays, or get a kid that's digging the museum. Yeah, definitely patches, and I look at patches, but definitely pins and hats and shirts for the 45th Infantry Division. Nothing specifically for the museum, which is always kind of frustrating, but we could get 45th Infantry Division stuff.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I judge the museum based on their exhibit layout and everything, but I'm also I'm one to judge a museum based on their bookstore and their gift shop, because it's always nice if you can really make a connection at that place and then bring something back with you that's meaningful. And like you said, patches and pins, that's all cool and everything, but come back with
that's
books
a souvenir.
Or whatever. That's
no, I totally blew off the books. There were books. It wasn't a bookstore. The NRA Museum, hands down, the best bookstore. Period. I mean, that's a decent bookstore. Period. Great. And it's at the museum, but they had some, and they were tuned to military, so it was okay. You could, again, if you were maybe an international traveler, or bringing someone international, or again, if someone who's just getting into guns and is looking for, it was like coffee table books. It wasn't manuals. It wasn't crazy amount of books, but it was your coffee table, your general books of World War II. Probably some stuff for like your kids, your preteens, or whatever, like the illustrated books that kind of, just kind of give you broad strokes about guns of history. And then, and I also didn't talk about I call them GI Joes, but they're like the figurines that are super elaborate and people really dig them. There was quite a bit of that, so there must be maybe something about the static displays or military museums that people that are like in the statues or whatever those are called, and then the vehicles. So they had some of that. There was like definitely a notch bigger than like a Matchbox car or something, but like a really nice model of like some of the military equipment that are the vehicles that were out front.
Very cool. And you said this one's free too, right? It's by donation, right?
Yeah, there's literally a fishbowl. Actually, I think it's like a fishbowl with, if I remember right, 2 Thompsons on chains. 2 Thompsons on a fireplace and a fishbowl in between. It says like, if you want.
That's awesome. And that's what's so great about a lot of these museums, is that they are free. The knowledge is power, and to be able to get it all for free makes it that much better.
And we also talked about them in 2 different parts of the country, so part of our goal here too is to get people curious about these. And if you discover some, let us know in the comments or contact either one of us. And then maybe next time you make some travel plans, do a quick search, see if there's something out there that might be a museum that you could spend some time.
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely let us know in the comments if you're from the Oklahoma City area or whatever. Like, hey, while you're there, check out this little bitty local museum, or maybe the VFW hall has some really cool stuff in it. Who knows? And same with with Springfield. Hey, if you're up here in the Massachusetts area, after you hit the Armory, go hit this place, or check out this gun shop. Maybe not in Massachusetts, but in Oklahoma, check it out. Because definitely the idea is to build as big a resource of this as we can. So if we're missing stuff, let us know in the comments, definitely, because we want to know about it.
That's a great point about the gun shops too. There's a neat one in Oklahoma. I can't think of the name. It's like Southwest Sports or something maybe, but it's not that. But you can't miss it. It's along the highway, and you know how sometimes you'll drive along the highway, they'll have an industrial area where a whole bunch of maybe pool cleaners and pest control or something will set up shop and have all their, like an industrial strip. This one gun shop has taken pretty much the entire industrial strip, so it's something like 27 lanes. It's 9,000 square feet. It's got a restaurant in there. As you drive down the highway, you just experience it. You're driving along, and it's just gun shop, gun shop, gun shop, gun shop. It's like almost between the 2 exits. It's really neat. So yeah, those are the kind of things that if you're heading to the museum anyway, that's part of our goal, is to get people as much information as possible about the trip.
That's great. Very cool. Yeah, I'm never one to turn down a good museum or a good gun shop. So that's great.
Right on. So let us know in the comments what you think, and we'll see you next Monday.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us.